I have spent 3 decades analyzing military medical logistics in combat environments. I have commanded evacuation operations under fire. I have reviewed after-action reports from every major conflict since Desert Storm. Nothing in that experience prepared me for the scale of the medical catastrophe that unfolded across northern Israel between May 8th and May 11th, 2026. Between 04:30 hours on May 8th and 18:20 hours on May 11th, Iranian forces and their regional proxies executed coordinated strikes against 35 separate IDF medical facilities across the northern theater. The targets included 12 field hospitals, 18 medical evacuation staging points, and 5 rear area surgical centers. Current estimates indicate that approximately 20,000 wounded Israeli soldiers are now without access to the surgical care, the blood products, or the evacuation infrastructure required to keep them alive. And in a development that has received zero coverage in Western media, senior officers in the IDF Northern Command have reportedly sent multiple requests to the political leadership in Jerusalem asking for authorization to negotiate a localized ceasefire. Those requests have been ignored. I want to be direct with you about what I am looking at. This is not a random escalation. This is not collateral damage from a broader campaign. This is the deliberate, methodical targeting of an adversary's medical infrastructure with the operational intent of rendering wounded soldiers untreatable, of overwhelming the evacuation system, and of forcing a political decision through the accumulation of preventable battlefield deaths. And it is working. The IDF is not losing because it is being outfought tactically. It is losing because it can no longer sustain the human cost of fighting. In the next 38 minutes, I'm going to walk you through 4 questions that define this crisis. First, how did Iran identify and target 35 separate medical facilities with the precision required to disable them operationally? Second, what specific weapons were used and why does their selection indicate prior intelligence preparation of the battlefield? Third, what is the timeline before the IDF medical system collapses entirely, and what does that collapse look like in human terms? And fourth, why has Washington remained silent while an American ally faces a medical catastrophe that violates every principle of the laws of armed conflict? If this is the kind of analysis you have been looking for, the kind that does not soften the operational reality or pretend that this is anything other than a historic failure of deterrence, subscribe and stay with me. Hit like, drop your assessment in the comments. I read them. Let me walk you through what happened phase by phase, target by target, so you understand why this is not a story about missiles and facilities. This is a story about preventable death at scale. Phase 1 began on May 8th at 04:30 hours local time. Iranian-supplied Pavé loitering munitions operated by Hezbollah forces in southern Lebanon struck 6 IDF medical evacuation staging points along the northern border corridor. These are not hospitals. These are hardened positions where wounded soldiers are stabilized before helicopter evacuation to rear area surgical facilities. Each staging point is typically staffed by 12 to 18 medical personnel, equipped with trauma supplies, and positioned within 3 to 6 kilometers of forward combat positions. The Pavé is a small, slow, electric-powered loitering munition with a warhead of approximately 5 kilograms. It is not designed to destroy hardened bunkers. It is designed to loiter over a target area for up to 2 hours, identify thermal signatures consistent with human activity, and execute a precision strike against personnel and unarmored equipment. The 6 staging points hit in the first wave were not destroyed. They were rendered non-operational. The medical personnel were either killed outright or wounded to the point where they could no longer perform triage. The communications equipment was disabled. The trauma supplies were scattered or contaminated, and the helicopter landing zones were cratered to prevent evacuation flights. Let me be precise about the targeting. Each of those 6 staging points was a dispersed tactical position with minimal electromagnetic signature and no permanent structures. They were not marked on commercial satellite imagery. They were not listed in public IDF records, and they moved locations every 72 to 96 hours as part of standard operational security. For Hezbollah to target them with precision, they needed real-time geolocation data, current imagery, and the operational patience to wait for the optimal strike window. That indicates reconnaissance strike integration at a level most Western analysts have publicly dismissed as beyond Iran's proxy forces. Phase 2 occurred 6 hours later. At 10:47 hours on May 8th, Iranian Revolutionary Guard forces launched approximately 180 Shahed 136 loitering munitions and 47 Fateh 31 and 13 precision-guided rockets from positions in western Syria. The targets were 12 IDF field hospitals distributed across the northern theater from the Golan Heights to the Mediterranean coast. These are mobile facilities typically housed in reinforced tents or prefabricated structures, equipped with surgical suites, blood banks, and intensive care capacity for up to 120 patients. The Shahed 136 swarms arrived first, saturating local air defense coverage and forcing Iron Dome batteries to expend interceptors. The Fateh 313 rockets followed 8 minutes later. Each rocket carries a 200-kilogram high-explosive warhead with a circular error probable of 10 to 15 meters. 11 of the 12 targeted field hospitals sustained direct hits. 3 were totally destroyed. 8 were damaged to the point where surgical operations were no longer possible. And 1, located near Kiryat Shmona, remained partially functional but lost its blood storage facility, its generator infrastructure, and 7 medical personnel. I want you to understand what the loss of a field hospital means in operational terms. The IDF medical system is built around a 3-tier evacuation model. Tier 1 is the staging point where soldiers receive immediate trauma care. Tier 2 is the field hospital where they receive surgical stabilization. Tier 3 is the rear area medical center where they receive definitive care and long-term treatment. If Tier 2 collapses, then wounded soldiers bypass surgical stabilization entirely and go directly from the battlefield to facilities that were never designed to handle the volume or the acuity of trauma cases arriving from active combat. The field hospitals destroyed on May 8th represented approximately 2,100 surgical beds and 340 trained surgical staff. That capacity does not magically reappear because you need it. It takes months to train a surgical team. It takes weeks to deploy and operationalize a field hospital. And it takes a logistics infrastructure that can deliver blood products, surgical supplies, anesthesia, and oxygen under fire. That infrastructure no longer exists in northern Israel. Phase 3 began on May 9th at 06:20 hours. This was the deep strike layer. Iranian forces launched 73 K-bar Shikan medium-range ballistic missiles from launchers inside Iranian territory, targeting 5 rear-area surgical centers in Haifa, Safed, Tiberias, Nahariya, and Afala. These are not field hospitals. These are permanent medical infrastructure, purpose-built trauma centers with MRI machines, CT scanners, ventilators, and intensive care units. They are the backbone of the IDF medical system. The K-bar Shaken has a range of 1,450 kilometers and carries a 650-kilogram warhead. It uses a combination of inertial guidance and terminal maneuvering to evade point defense systems. 61 of the 73 missiles penetrated Israeli air defenses. 18 struck the 5 targeted medical centers. The remaining 43 impacted secondary and tertiary targets, including ambulance depots, medical supply warehouses, and fuel storage facilities supporting medical evacuation helicopters. The surgical center in Haifa took 4 direct hits. The building did not collapse, but the central power distribution system was destroyed, the oxygen generation plant was disabled, and the trauma wing sustained structural damage that rendered it unsafe for occupation. The facility is no longer operational. The SAFE Trauma Center took 3 hits and remains partially functional, but it has lost approximately 60% of its intensive care capacity. The Tiberias Center took 2 hits and lost its imaging department, its blood bank, and its emergency generator infrastructure. The Nahariya and Afula centers sustained moderate damage but remain operational at reduced capacity. Here is the cumulative effect. The IDF began this conflict with approximately 4,200 surgical beds distributed across field hospitals, trauma centers, and rear area medical facilities. After 3 days of Iranian strikes, that number is now approximately 1,800 beds. The number of wounded soldiers requiring surgical care is estimated at 20,000 and rising. That is a mismatch of more than 10 to 1. And the number of trained surgical teams capable of operating under these conditions has been reduced by roughly 55% due to personnel casualties, facility destruction, and evacuation of medical staff from forward positions. This is not a temporary shortage. This is a systemic collapse. Phase 4 is what happened inside the IDF Northern Command, and this is where the story moves from operational disaster to political crisis. According to multiple reports from Israeli defense correspondents citing unnamed senior officers, the commander of Northern Command and at least 2 division-level commanders submitted formal requests to the IDF General Staff and to the Israeli political leadership, asking for authorization to negotiate a localized humanitarian ceasefire for the purpose of evacuating wounded soldiers and reconstituting medical infrastructure. Those requests were denied. I have commanded units in combat. I know what it means when a field commander asks for a ceasefire. It means he has concluded that continuing operations will produce casualties that cannot be justified by any conceivable operational gain. It means he is watching soldiers die from wounds that would be survivable if the medical system were functional. And it means he is being forced to choose between the mission and the lives of the men and women under his command. That is not a choice any officer should have to make. But it is the choice that Northern Command is making right now in real time, because the political leadership in Jerusalem has decided that accepting a ceasefire is strategically unacceptable, even as the medical system collapses. Let me tell you what this looks like on the ground, because the human cost here is not abstract. There are soldiers lying in makeshift triage facilities with injuries that would be treatable in a functioning medical system, abdominal wounds that require surgical intervention within 6 hours, traumatic amputations that require vascular repair and blood transfusion, severe burns that require sterile environments and pain management. Those soldiers are not receiving the care they need because the facilities that would provide it no longer exist, because the medical personnel who would deliver it are dead or wounded, and because the evacuation helicopters that would transport them are grounded due to fuel shortages and air defense threats. Some of those soldiers will survive. Many will not. And the ones who do not survive will die knowing that they did not die in combat. They died waiting for care that never arrived. Their families will receive notifications that their son or daughter was killed in action, but the truth is more specific. They were killed by a strategic decision to target medical infrastructure, and they were abandoned by a political leadership that refused to negotiate the ceasefire that might have saved them. That is the human cost insertion you will not see in the sanitized briefings coming out of Tel Aviv, but it is the operational reality that every field medic in northern Israel is living with right now. Now let me address the question that I know is on your mind. How did Iran do this? How did they identify 35 separate medical facilities, many of them mobile or deliberately camouflaged, and target them with enough precision to disable them operationally? The answer requires you to abandon the assumption that Iran is a technologically backward regional actor stumbling through this conflict. The targeting of medical infrastructure at this scale requires detailed pre-conflict intelligence preparation, real-time reconnaissance updates, and battle damage assessment capability to confirm kills and adjust follow-on strikes. Iran demonstrated all three. The intelligence preparation likely began months or years before this conflict. Iranian intelligence services, working in coordination with Hezbollah, have been mapping IDF deployments, logistics nodes, and medical infrastructure since at least 2018. They have used a combination of overhead satellite reconnaissance, human intelligence from infiltrated agents, signals intelligence from intercepted communications, and open-source intelligence from commercial satellite providers. By the time the first missile launched, Iran already had a comprehensive target list, preloaded coordinates, and a strike plan that allocated specific weapon systems to specific target types based on hardness, location, and strategic value. The real-time reconnaissance came from a combination of Iranian reconnaissance drones, Hezbollah forward observers, and possibly compromised IDF communications networks. The speed with which Iranian forces adapted their targeting after the first wave indicates that they had live feedback on strike effectiveness and that they were using that feedback to refine subsequent waves. And the battle damage assessment capability is visible in the pattern of follow-on strikes. Facilities that were damaged but not destroyed in the first wave were restruck in the second or third wave. That indicates that Iran was monitoring the results of their strikes, identifying facilities that remained partially operational, and allocating additional munitions to finish the job. That is not the behavior of a technologically primitive adversary. That is the behavior of a military force executing a comprehensive operational plan with doctrinal sophistication. The contrast here is stark. The IDF is a technologically advanced force that has spent decades building a medical system designed to minimize battlefield deaths through rapid evacuation and world-class trauma care. Iran is a sanctioned regional power that has spent decades studying that system, identifying its vulnerabilities, and building the weapons required to destroy it. And in 72 hours, Iran succeeded. The IDF medical system is not degraded, it is collapsing. What happened in northern Israel is not just a humanitarian catastrophe. It is a signal to every military planner in the world. It is a signal that medical infrastructure is no longer a protected category in modern warfare. It is a signal that targeting medical facilities produces strategic effects that cannot be achieved through conventional combat operations. And it is a signal that the laws of armed conflict are observed only when both sides agree to observe them, and when one side decides they no longer apply, there is no enforcement mechanism that can stop them. In Moscow, the lesson is clear. If you want to break an adversary's will to fight, target their medical system. Soldiers will tolerate casualties if they believe they will receive care. They will not tolerate preventable death caused by the systematic destruction of the infrastructure that is supposed to save them. Russia has been watching this conflict closely. They have been taking notes. And the next time they face a NATO adversary, the playbook will include strikes against field hospitals, trauma centers, and medical evacuation routes. In Beijing, the calculation is equally straightforward. The United States military depends on a global medical evacuation network that moves wounded soldiers from combat zones to surgical facilities in Germany, Japan, and the continental United States. That network is vulnerable to exactly the same kind of targeting that Iran just executed against Israel. The logistics hubs, the airfields, the communication nodes, the blood supply infrastructure, all of it can be mapped, targeted, and destroyed. And once it is destroyed, American soldiers die from wounds that would have been survivable in a functioning medical system. That is the operational takeaway that Chinese military planners are documenting right now. For the Gulf states, the message is darker. If Israel, the most capable military in the region, cannot protect its medical infrastructure from Iranian strikes, then what chance do smaller Gulf militaries have? The answer is none, and that means the Gulf states need to recalibrate their security relationships, hedge their bets, and avoid becoming the next target of an Iranian campaign designed to collapse their ability to sustain combat operations through the destruction of rear-area medical infrastructure. And for the broader international community, this is the moment where the laws of armed conflict cease to be meaningful. The Geneva Conventions are not enforced by international courts. They are enforced by the willingness of states to comply with them even when non-compliance offers tactical advantages. Iran has decided that the tactical advantage of destroying Israeli medical facilities outweighs any reputational cost or legal consequence. And they are correct because there is no enforcement mechanism. There will be no war crimes tribunal. There will be no sanctions that Iran is not already enduring. There will be condemnations, and then there will be silence, and then other militaries will adopt the same tactics because they work. I warned about this. I have said for years that the erosion of norms in modern warfare would lead to the targeting of infrastructure that previous generations considered off limits. I said it in congressional testimony. I said it in articles that were dismissed as alarmist. I am not interested in being proven right. I am interested in the preventable deaths that are occurring right now because the international system failed to enforce the norms that were supposed to prevent this. Let me come back to the timeline because this is where the arithmetic becomes inescapable. The IDF currently has approximately 1,800 functioning surgical beds. The number of wounded soldiers requiring care is 20,000 and rising by an estimated 400 to 600 per day. Even if the IDF stops all offensive operations immediately and reduces the casualty rate to near zero, it will take weeks to clear the backlog of soldiers waiting for surgical care. And during those weeks, soldiers with survivable injuries will die because there are not enough surgical teams, not enough intensive care beds, and not enough blood products to treat them all. The United States can provide emergency medical support. American military hospitals can be deployed. American surgical teams can be flown in. American blood banks can be tapped. But the scale of the need exceeds the capacity of any emergency response. And even if the resources could be mobilized, the question remains, where do you put them? The rear area surgical centers have been bombed. The field hospitals have been destroyed. And the staging points where wounded soldiers are supposed to be stabilized before evacuation no longer exist. This is not a problem that can be solved by working harder or flying more missions. This is a structural collapse of the medical system that keeps soldiers alive in war, and there is no quick fix. The question I want to leave you with is this. If senior IDF officers are asking for a ceasefire to save the lives of 20,000 wounded soldiers, and if the political leadership is refusing that request, then what is the moral calculus that justifies continuing operations? Is the calculus that a ceasefire would be seen as weakness? Is it that admitting the medical system has collapsed would undermine public support for the war? Or is it that the political leadership in Jerusalem has concluded that the human cost is acceptable as long as it does not force a change in strategic direction? Leave your assessment in the comments. I read every one. If this analysis gave you the unfiltered operational reality that you will not find anywhere else, share it, hit like, subscribe. The next update is already in preparation. I will see you in the next.